going to share his screen, I believe. And Patrick, it's all you.
All right, is my screen up showing a master planning presentation?
Not on my end.
Hold on.
There we go.
Yep, you're good.
All right. Well, thank you, Allison, and thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. Allison approached me to kind of talk a little bit about some of the stuff we're doing with the city and some of the approaches we're taking. So today we're going to talk a little bit about stormwater master planning. I know sanitary is another big component of what we do, but we're really going to focus on the stormwater side with this one. This is an interesting presentation because I've given it now twice for my Toastmasters Club, and I've given it once for the Iowa Water Environment Association Operational Collection System Conference. So a little different audiences each time. So I'm trying to make this as general as I can with as much information as I can. So we'll take any questions at the end. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the Des Moines utility information regarding kind of what Public Works manages. Talk a little bit about the master plan drivers. Why are we considering going through an effort like this right now? And then talking a little bit about kind of the goals and benefits associated with master planning, because we are really just at the beginning stage of this. We'll talk about that towards the end of this too. So Des Moines Utilities, I'm sure most of you know, Des Moines serves approximately 215,000 people in an 89 square mile service area. Des Moines Public Works primary utilities that we manage are the sanitary, sewer, and the stormwater utilities. However, I'm sure some know, but maybe not everybody does, that the Water Reclamation Authority, is a regional authority that provides the wastewater treatment, but then they also do some of the collection as well. The major interceptors are owned and operated by the Water Reclamation Authority, and then drinking water treatment is provided by Des Moines Water Works. A few statistics about the Des Moines stormwater utility. There's about 500 miles of storm sewer within the city. That's the underground piping and boxes and all the different underground networks that exist. 270 miles of open channel conveyance according to the GIS system that we have. I'm sure there's more out there that's just not completely quantified, and we'll want to make sure we're capturing that. Within the system, there's about 29,000 storm sewer structures. So there's a lot of those storm inlets you can see along the curves. There's a lot of the junction boxes and other pieces and parts that go into that. 32 pump stations, 35 detention basins, and the city owns and operates 16 miles of but 16 miles, but they operate about 23 miles because we actually operate and maintain about 7 miles of core levees. And that's one of the big projects we'll talk through about this in just a little bit too. So you might ask yourself, why is stormwater master planning really a big issue right now? And I guess for me, I've only been at the city about a year now, and so I missed the June event, but I grew up in central Iowa, so I know the big events that come through every 5 to 10 years. So sometimes those are big river events. So that's when the Des Moines River, the Iowa River get filled up and flood. But what's really driving this right now was more of a localized flooding event. And if you lived in northern Des Moines or Ankeny towards the north there, pretty much everybody was either impacted or knew somebody that was impacted by the June 30th, 2018 event. The picture in the lower right is actually the tracking of how much water was dumped from that event. And the bad part was it was a very short duration event, but it dumped a lot of water. And so as engineers, we like to be able to quantify what type of storms they are. Is this a storm that's going to happen, we anticipate, every year based off historical averages, or is this going to be every 100 years? And the June 2018 event turned out to be, in Des Moines anyway, that 7 to 8 inches was about a 500-year storm because of the amount of water and the time that it took for it to hit the ground. As it traveled up, it got worse into Ankeny, so they got about 10 inches of rain up there, and it caused some problems there, but it caused even more problems for Des Moines as it was kind of coming down the east side in 4 Mile and flooding on the east side of Des Moines. So as you can tell, the picture in the lower left and the map in the upper right, significant property damage. The map in the upper right, they did a lot of surveys on damaged homes, and the green homes were houses that had minor impact, all the way up to the red ones, which were full structural destruction basically it's unsalvageable. So although we don't design for a 500-year storm, it really helped us shine a light on where do we have a lot of our seriously inadequate infrastructure. And even if we don't handle the storm inside the pipe, when we have these sort of events, we need to be able to manage that water some way. And so how does that flow overland? With the developments that have occurred over the years, a lot of the channels have filled in, and now they're enclosed box culverts that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s that are probably inadequate right now. Or even before that, there's still wooden box culverts, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that still exist in the city. So these sort of events really shine a light on it, and it gets a lot of public support on we need to do more with our storm sewer systems. So the Des Moines sewers, storm sewers has an annual capital budget that gets put together every year, and it's typically about a 5-year projection that we put out there, and that's what we tend to kind of base the rates on, the stormwater enterprise fees, the rates that are associated with that. And so what you're looking at here is a couple pictures out of our last year's budget book, but the upper right kind of projects are going on. So there are stormwater projects going around the city, but the more interesting one to me is the graphic on the lower left. Starting in 17, 18, 19, it was $10 to $15 million a year was being spent on storm sewer. 21, 22, it really jumps up, and there's a tremendous peak right in that, with this year, next year, and the following year on dollars that are going to be spent on stormwater. And so you would think, well, we're spending a lot of money, it should be taken care of. But the problem we're running into is a lot of that's really being captured or being rolled up in large programs. The flood mitigation program, the levee program, which we'll talk about in the next slide, watershed repair projects. So like I talked about, and you can see on the map in the upper right, the closest creek watershed in the kind of the northwest part of town, the Hamilton Drain in north central, Leetown on the east, and then Crawford Creek and Easter Lake in the south. Those watersheds have had a lot of dollars that have been identified, they need to be spent, but there are other issues throughout the city, and there has not been a concentrated effort or concerted effort to try to prioritize where should we spend the dollars. For the most part, it's really with the point of whoever's yelling the loudest gets the dollars. And that's a reality with just about everything, unless you have a defensible program in place to say, this is why we're spending where we are now. Carrie's being attacked. And so the big programs are there, but then there's a little bit left in storm repair programs. So the flood mitigation program, I don't know if you've seen this before, but this is really focused around the downtown and the southeast Des Moines areas where we have the levees protecting a lot of the areas, the low-lying areas next to both the Raccoon River and the Des Moines River are where those 16 miles of levees that the city owns, and then kind of in southeast Des Moines where the Army Corps of Engineers owns, that we're going through an upgrade of those right now. We actually got a grant for about $85 million a couple years ago to do these upgrades. And so a lot of this is being funded, from state dollars. However, from the time we started this, the cost for the program has just continued to rise. And so that $85 million from a couple years ago has actually increased to about almost $120 million. And we haven't built one, and we haven't upgraded one section of levee yet. We're really just, the more you dig into levees, you just tend to find more and more stuff that just costs more. So the challenge we have is the additional cost on top of that $85 million is going to be borne by the stormwater utility. So that's putting some pressure on what else we can do throughout the city. All right. An example of the watershed repair projects, and this is the closest creek watershed. So this is Beaverdale neighborhood, where a lot of this, where a lot of the really bad flooding occurred last year. But you can kind of see this watershed here. This is actually an older study that was completed around 2000, 2002 that had never been fully implemented yet. So when 2018 came around, we pulled that back out and started really focusing on where can we be spending some dollars to start mitigating risk on the storm sewer system. And this is, as you can see, it's a multi-phase program out there. It's all magically color-coded and a lot of different things going on. And as of right now, phase 1A and 1B, let me see if I can, laser pointer. So 1A kind of in the middle, and then 1B, which is up at 47th and Holcomb in the center of Beaverdale neighborhood, where there's some work going on. And then ultimately we will connect everything through there. 1A is actually one of those old wooden box culverts I was talking about that's still in service right now. And it's just one of those, it's at risk of failing pretty much every year. There's been at least one incident I know that they backed a concrete truck on it. It didn't have enough structural capacity, and the concrete truck collapsed the box culvert, and was not a good thing. So this is an example of kind of those more watershed approaches we're looking at, and these are good, but are all of these really higher priority than other areas within the city that just haven't been yelling and screaming as loud? Maybe, maybe not, but that's why we're going to go through and try to capture as much of that as we can. So some planning challenges we have, as you saw, there were large programs that are dominating the capital improvement program. The stormwater CIP peaks at about $40 million, in 2021, but then it drops down to about $7 million. But most of that dollars is still rolled up in that large program dollars. There's only about $1 million or $2 million a year for system-wide renewal and replacement, and that's just not enough for the system of our size. So we have an opportunity right now as we're working through some of those large programs that have already been that are using a lot of the capital dollars to put a good plan in place for the stormwater system. A defensible plan, a risk-based plan, one that the council can get behind, and also a plan that's not being driven by one person. This is a plan and a process that the entire department is behind, and so it's not just one person driving it. So if that person takes another opportunity, it doesn't just die. So I threw this one in, excuses to avoid master planning. Master planning is just an engineering activity. Well, as an engineer, I like to have a good plan, a good, well thought out plan based off of data, based off of information that we know. And if we don't know, we make some reasonable assumptions based off of engineering judgment or, information from the folks that have been here. There's a lot of good information on folks that have been with the city for 30, 40 years that we can try to bring into this process so that even if we don't have the perfect data, we're pretty confident in what we're seeing is reasonable. Another thing is we've always done it this way. Why do we want to change anything? Everything's working fine. Well, it's not. I mean, it's obviously there's problems going around throughout the city, and it's pretty obvious whenever it rains. A 2-year storm event causes creeks to leap their banks and start flooding streets. That's a problem. So we really need to be able to identify where those are at, quantify how much that is, and start getting projects scheduled out. It may not be next year or the following year, but making sure we have a plan in place to deal with those. Nothing ever changes. Well, if nobody's willing to step up and push something like this through, nothing ever will change. Our Public Works Director, Jonathan Gano, with support of a lot of residents that were on a lot of the after action flood reporting and then the committees that were after the 2018 event, see this as a need. And so that's why we're really moving forward with this. And then a bunch of us on the ground are helping move it forward. It's too difficult or too expensive. Yeah, we're actually in the process right now of engaging a consulting firm to help us with this. And it's going to be a relatively expensive effort to put in place. But when you look at, 500 miles of storm sewer system, 30 plus pump stations and basins and everything else, you're looking at probably around $1 billion worth of assets to spend $500,000 to $1 million to put a long-term plan, long-term program and process in place. It's very minor compared to the overall replacement cost of the system. And then my favorite one, it's just a new flavor of the month and it will blow over soon. Folks that have been around for a long time say, well, if I just keep my head down and I don't say anything, eventually it's going to go away. Well, I don't think it will, because I think there's a lot of support behind this. And it's really being driven a lot by the residents. We're pulling together a stormwater advisory committee right now. And there's some very passionate folks that stormwater is a very important thing, that they go and, beat the drum in front of the city council saying, this will remain as a priority for you. So some of our goals with master planning, Des Moines has both two strategic plans, the Guide DSM, which is kind of our strategic plan, and then our master planning strategic plan, which is kind of the land usage and how all that's going to be done. So we're trying to align what we're doing here with, the upgraded infrastructure, the financially sound city, and the high-performing organizational goals from the Des Moines strategic plan. And then reflecting those goals with the public works, we have our own strategic business plan and kind of focusing in on what sort of tactical things we can be doing to make this a sustainable plan. And ultimately, we have some objectives, improving flood protection of public and private properties. Well, I've been talking about that a lot, so that's probably a given. Focus on safety. There was somebody that died in the 2018 storm event. it was heavy water over a roadway. Somebody drove into deeper water than they thought, and their car got washed away, and they did not make it. Improving water quality in our streams and rivers. We always want to do that from the perspective of we have a national permit, a National Pollution Elimination Discharge System permit from EPA and the Iowa DNR that we will endeavor to make sure we maintain the water quality in our streams and rivers. And ultimately, the hardest one is, delivering our services at the lowest life cycle cost. The hard part that, the way it's always been done is the projects we identify are, this is the lowest capital cost or what's the cost today. We don't always look at long-term what makes the most sense from operational cost, renewal cost. If I put a pump station in partway down just because it was easier at the time, or we didn't want to disrupt, a neighborhood by putting a gravity line in, that's going to have to get renewed. There's going to be pumps and equipment and electrical components that get renewed every 5 to 10 years, and ultimately everything every 20 years, versus the pipe that's going to be put in is going to last 50 to 75 years with very minimal maintenance and operational costs. So being able to compare one project with another, we need to be able to look at that full life cycle cost. So those are the main objectives, what we're trying to get through with the plan. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the phasing and the process we're going through right now. We actually we put out an RFP at the end of last year to a bunch of local firms and national firms, and we ended up getting 6 firms submit proposals to support us as we're going through the development of our master plan. And so we really broke it into 2 phases, and I'm going to show 3, and 3 really being the execution of it. But phase 1, we're looking at data collection and utility assessment. So we're looking at, what do we are right now? What do we have right now? What information do we have right now? What policies and ordinances, design standards do we have in place? Also looking at regulatory-wise, what current permit requirements do we have? We do have a permit that we need to meet. How well are we meeting it? We're going to be going through an audit of that. But then also looking out future, are there future regulatory pressures that may impact what we're doing now that we'd be well advised to consider when we're putting together a program like this? Looking at existing data. How are we collecting data on our assets, on our pipes and our structures, and the work that's being done, and the materials that are being used and the contractors that are being done, so that we can understand how much does it cost to actually operate and maintain a system of our size. Most people are still using a lot of paperwork orders for that. We actually have a program called Lucidity, is a computerized maintenance management system for us that we use to track our assets, our work, and also tied in with GIS so we can see it on mapping. But understand, what do we have and how confident in the data? Just because I have a database that says this is what everything is, well, that data came from somewhere, and it was usually somebody pulling something off of an as-built, or how confident are you? So there have to be some spot checks on that when we're looking at that. Another big piece of this is public outreach and education planning. We do quite a bit of public outreach right now. From the city website to bill stuffers with Des Moines Water Works to getting out in the neighborhood. You can laugh at me, but the fish in the bottom middle is me dancing at one of the parks at a stormwater event that we did. Or even at the Home and Garden Show, we were out there helping. The MPO was leading it, and there were a bunch of other folks from cities and the county supporting the rain campaign, and just getting up public awareness on what can and should be done. But we're going to take a look at all those things and see what's working, what's not, and how can we improve that. Talk a little bit about data we're collecting. Well, once you collect it, you need to make sure you have a good system in order to keep it. What IT capabilities do we have? What do we need? And then also our capital budgeting. That one's a little bit harder because Public Works doesn't actually execute the projects. There's engineering department is the one that actually goes through design and construction for the projects. And so there's sometimes a disconnect. We have it, we identify it as there's a need here, here's the problem. Engineering comes back with, well, here's the solution. They fix it, repair it, make it bigger, whatever, relocate it, whatever they do. And then they turn it back to us to operate long-term. So we want to make sure there's a good connection there between that department and our department during the problem identification, problem completion, and turning back for operation and maintenance. And so back to operation and maintenance assessment, we need to look a little as well of, how are we doing with operation and maintenance? Benchmarking is a way to kind of understand how are other high-performing utilities working to make sure that they're meeting their goals? They're meeting their regulatory goals. They're meeting their resident expectation goals. They're meeting, that they're managing everything to the best dollar. They're not letting stuff break down. So everything we're doing is an emergency repair. We're trying to be as proactive as we can. So taking a look at staffing levels, equipment needs, and external contractor support is another piece of what we're going to be looking at as part of this process. So that was kind of identifying what do we have and where are we at right now. We take that data and start doing some analysis with it, and that's going to be the phase 2. So looking at system characterization, understanding, making sure if there's gaps in our data, how do we go and collect that on the gravity system? Are we missing something on the pump stations? How do we tie in the green infrastructure that's being installed? We're looking at some of the newer developments, the Market District. We're starting to have some meetings on less so that every building or development has to do their own, on-site detention, moving more of a, regional detention process. Green infrastructure, bioswales, in the green space between the street and the sidewalks, and being able to manage some of it there, and looking at that as an overall system. Versus Des Moines has not done that very much. I know some of the other cities in the region have, but Des Moines has been a little reluctant from doing too much of that. And so how do we do that? Going through and doing some modeling, doing some high-level modeling for hydraulic and hydrologic modeling, problem identification. So this goes back to some of that public outreach, which is the next one we had there. But some folks have had stormwater issues, but they've just been an issue for so long that they've kind of given up on raising it as an issue anymore. They've either, the basement floods, when it rains, there's a foot of water in my basement. Well, we put everything up on a shelf 2 feet in the air, and we don't really seem to have any problems with it. It fills up for a little bit, and then it goes away, and they just kind of live with it. I'm kind of flabbergasted by that, but that's what's happened in some neighborhoods. And so how do we get out and really try to, capture as much of that as we can, so that when we're identifying the problems we have, that they're realistic? And also so that when we're done, people don't come out of the woodworks and say, well, I didn't get to tell you what my problem was. So we need to be able to have some good public outreach there. From there, we go through CIP development, the 5-year, and then looking at O&M costs, making sure we're capturing that and putting together a long-term financial plan. And then phase 3, this is where you're getting into that design, construction, and operations of everything that you have. Making sure you have capital projects that are solving the problems, making sure they're being done on time and on budget, making sure we're meeting our permit compliance, our stormwater permit and our sanitary MPDS permit, our system maintenance, making sure we're out there and making sure inlets are clear when it's raining, or if they do get clogged up, we're cleaning them out in a quick time manner. And then periodically updating the plan based off new information. If we can go through this effort and we build this perfectly, make this perfect report, if it goes and lives on a shelf somewhere, it's basically worthless in a couple of years. We need to have some way so that this continues to be updated based off of new information that comes in, new things get prioritized. We have a big rainstorm and we have issues in another part of the city. We don't want to throw the old plan out, but we want to be able to adjust it as new information becomes available. Some benefits of master planning can also link opportunities. Des Moines, like I said, hasn't done a ton of green infrastructure, but we're dipping our toes in a bunch of places, either in neighborhoods or even outside of the neighborhoods. We're working with Polk County and some of the other organizations for bioreactors and 4 mile oxbows in 4 miles, kind of restoration of some of the smaller oxbows along the streamway. Trying to standardize how do we manage those things? We do a pretty good job of designing them and putting them in, but it's difficult to make sure that they get established and make sure that they're maintained for the long term. And we're even evaluating opportunities outside the city that can benefit the city for both flooding and water quality. Our cover crops, something that are worthwhile for us to put some dollars into if there's a return to the city on those sort of things. And so we're looking at things very small scale to very large scale. So some outcomes and tools that we really want to gain from this, and I talked a little bit about this already, and I know I'm up to 25 minutes, so I apologize, I'm almost done. But we're looking at benchmarking with other utilities, having that as a way to talk through where should we be targeting, having more effective public outreach and education methods and tools. We talked about the modeling a little bit, but having at least a system-wide across the city, the hydrologic, so understanding how rain has fallen, and then the hydraulic piece of once it hits the ground, how does it travel? You know, it travels across the yards, it travels across the streets, it ends up in the pipes and the streams and the rivers, and understanding the different rainfall events on how that those actually flow. Having tools and processes to collect information on the assets, and then also understanding what's the remaining useful life. You know, we put a pipe in 50 years ago. Do we expect that to last another 5 years or another 50 years? And so you generally need information. You can make a lot of assumptions. I can make a lot of assumptions and come in the ballpark, but it's much better to have specific information on each of those assets to be able to make those projections. You know, linking electronic systems to store, manipulate, and output the data. So right now we have a lot of different systems. IT has systems, engineering has systems, public works has systems, finance has systems, and they don't talk together very well. And so quite often things slip through the cracks when we're trying to make sure it's getting passed from one department to one department, or even one person to one person. Sometimes things get dropped or missed when we're doing those sorts of things. Developing a process to prioritize failed or soon to fail assets into projects. So that's that larger project. And the next piece is really the ultimate goal for this for me is having a prioritized 5-year capital plan, but ultimately doing a much longer look, looking at a 25-year financial plan, understanding what do we have coming down the pipeline? Do we have a lot of stuff that was installed 50, 60 years ago that we anticipate will probably come to end of life that we're going to need to renew or replace in a very short window because everything's just starting to break down? And then tools to track if we meet our goals. So master planning benefits, we talked about this, moving a little bit from reactive to proactive, you know, better understanding risks, manage costs, and be able to justify your needs to your elected officials. I've actually been through this with another utility, and that was one of the biggest benefits of going through something like this. Quite often when you come to an elected official and say, we need more money to do this. Well, why? And what if we don't? What could happen? What's the risk? So having a risk-based approach to this so that they can understand if we're not doing this, the system's continuing to get worse over the years, and really we're just taking and pushing the problem further down the road. And then finally, you know, moving towards a program, you know, that delivers infrastructure assets at a desired level of service at an acceptable risk and the lowest life cycle cost. And I'll let you read my final thoughts, but I will go ahead and open it up for any questions. Are we doing questions now or at the very end?
We're gonna do them now for you.
Okay.
And I'll help with that. So it looks like the first handful of questions are more about the green infrastructure. So bioswales, prairie planting, open lands, and then reducing impervious surfaces. So how is this being worked into the planning process? I know we've had Jonathan Gano before with our group and saying that, you know, he's always looking for opportunities. So how is this being built into the plan and then the capital improvement program?
So the one thing we don't really have is what's our policy on green infrastructure? Do we have goals for that? You know, the hard part with a lot of what's going on right now is I didn't really get into the sanitary side of things, but the combined sewer program is another massive program that the city's been working on for about 20 years, where we've been separating the storm and sanitaries from a single pipeline into separate pipelines. And some of the areas where people really think it would be a good idea to do the green infrastructure is like in the downtown areas. But we spent a considerable amount of dollars down there to do either the sewer separation or areas that we just can't separate them. And so if we put green infrastructure in there, then that water will go through the green infrastructure and then end up in a combined sewer that ends up at a treatment facility in front of the wastewater treatment plant, and it goes through the full process anyway. So just doing green infrastructure to do green infrastructure's sake doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We want to make sure that we're getting value out of those dollars put into it. And in addition, making sure that we are maintaining them, because I'm sure you've been by some that the day they were put in or the first couple of years, they look pretty good, but over time they just get nastier and nastier and they're just not maintained very well. And there are dollars associated with that. It's time and it's money. And so whether that's internal crews are doing it or external crews are contracted out to do it, we need to make sure that that's being done so that they're functional into the long term. So as far as linking them in, that's going to be one of those priorities. You know, when you're looking at a project, do we want to have green infrastructure as a component of it? Is that a policy? We want to make sure if it makes financial sense that is included as a piece of it, or maybe that costs a little bit more, but there's enough of a value. It's not just managing the water quantity, but it's also that water quality piece. Green infrastructure is usually a pretty cost-effective way to kind of meet some of those goals as well.
I guess, and to that point, I think, we talked, our last webinar was about transportation, and obviously this group is for sustainability. So is there any coordination between your department and, say, the transportation department or anything like that to incorporate green streets or think about these green infrastructure pieces as projects go on outside of your department specifically?
There have been isolated times that has happened. That has not been the typical approach that we've done it. I think as we kind of put this forward, really what that comes back to is, what level of service are we trying to maintain? Every work group has their own, the transportation group has, get rid of potholes, provide enough capacity, but then, they do produce a lot of water that comes off of them. And I think as of right now, we don't generally include that with a lot of the detention that we have, regionally. It's handled regionally, but when we're putting in smaller basins, the roadways are just kind of left alone, even though there's a lot of water and runoff that comes from those. So being able to link those together and making sure when we're looking at some of those more regional basins or regional, green infrastructure, whether that is, permeable pavers or whether we're looking at, some of the newer development, putting in, bioswales or, ways to actually handle that runoff on site before it, just ends up in the river. I think there's a big opportunity for that conversation to occur right now on a more system-wide level versus it's very much now it's, well, we have a project, there might be an opportunity here, let's talk about that one specific example, versus that just becomes the norm. When we're doing those sort of projects, is there an opportunity to do those?
Sure, that makes sense. So this question's from me. So in Dubuque, they unearthed the B branch. It was a box culvert running through a neighborhood. And I know that, I don't know if many citizens in Des Moines know until they live in that neighborhood that there might be a stream that they are living above. Has there been any conversations with the neighborhoods to unearth those things? Is that something that we're not even touching?
So the one example I know is Hamilton Drain, kind of in the north. Let's see if I can get back to it real quick. Kind of in the north central part of Des Moines, is one of those areas. So yeah, this one here. Kind of up here is an area that still has those old wooden box culverts. They're very low capacity. They are, when they get filled up, the development that occurred in there. So it started out, there was an open channel and everybody built around it. Developer came in and said, well, I can squeeze 3 or 4 more houses if I build a box culvert and build houses on top of it. But then that takes away the open channel where the water goes when, there's small events, but then big events, it doesn't contain it very well either, because then it turns into overland flow. And now that's when we got houses basically surrounded by moats, if not just completely inundated by those storm events. So that one specifically, there was concern that it would have such an impact to the style of neighborhood it was, and it would have required so many houses to be bought out to do that. For the most part, we're looking at more kind of regional basins, detention basins that we're putting in with very targeted buyouts versus just trying to clear out houses along that, what was previously the open channel through there. I mean, it's kind of a decision of what impact you want to have on the characteristic of your neighborhood, and then how much of an impact you have on the residents that are there. I mean, when they're being bought out, they're being bought out at market value. So maybe it's a house that floods and maybe they want to be bought out. But it's also then a big burden on the city that you're spending a lot of money on buyouts when it might be more cost effective to just upsize the pipes, put some basins in, and then kind of leave the neighborhoods in a similar way that they were before without being so disruptive, because these projects are very, very, very disruptive no matter how you do them. And so if you're going through and tearing out a lot of houses and then putting channels back in, that would be very disruptive to the neighborhoods too.
Sure. We have somebody who lives in an apartment, so they don't get water bills. They have a set fee. So what kind of outreach are you doing to people who don't have Facebook and don't necessarily have the typical communication pathways that you might use?
Yeah, that is a challenge. For the most part, we're trying to get out. So I'll say this. So our public information office has added a couple new employees in the last year to help us identify and support getting information out there from city council, from the departments. And this one specifically, we've been putting quite a bit of information out. So we're trying to get, if they don't get a water bill, then yeah, they won't see the Des Moines Water Works mailers. Facebook is another way that they're putting stuff out there, the website. But ultimately, we're going to have to start doing more public outreach in person, of which now we have a challenge with that too. You know, the COVID-19 restrictions have made it very difficult, if impossible, to have public meetings and reach out to smaller neighborhood groups. And so we're kind of working through that dynamic as well. So for what I like with these kind of efforts, the type of firms that we bring in to support us with these things are typically national firms that have done these other places. And my favorite ideas are good ideas that I've stolen from somebody else. What's worked well somebody else. And I'm not saying I want to just take that and apply that here, but I want to make sure what we're looking at doesn't make sense to apply within our city.
Sure. One last question for you, and then we'll move on to John. Who or what organization is doing your hydraulic modeling? Or, I'm sorry, hydrologic.
Our hydrologic modeling. So there is not one specific organization. It's typically done by the private consulting engineering firms in the city. So firms like, HDR and Vingstra & Kim and Snyder and those firms have been doing some of that. So it's not really it's not a specific organization. It's usually a watershed by watershed approach. The master planning will be done by another firm that will be kind of looking at the high level. But our goal with that is to try to take all of the previous models and try to stitch them together as best we can in areas that we've already done that, so we don't have to recreate those. Sure. But the hydrologic modeling, yeah, that's typically more of a system-wide where we're bringing in, rainfall data and then applying it into the model. So if they're asking what specific model, I think PC Swim is what we typically use for that. I think it's a 2D model. But there are other ones out there I know that have been used. So I don't know if I can answer that one specifically.
Sure. Well, we appreciate you, Patrick, for coming and sharing all this information. Sheila, I think John's going to talk about bioreactors, and if not, we will come back to that. But it is my pleasure to now introduce John Swanson. He's a water resource planner and watershed management authority coordinator with Polk County. John is a Des Moines native from the east side and has coordinated watershed efforts in Central Iowa since 2012, including projects along Big Creek, Easter Lake, 4 Mile Creek, and Walnut Creek. John didn't add this into his bio, but John was recently honored with the Circle of Excellence Award from the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance as part of the 3rd annual IAWA Iowa Watershed Awards, and he is honored alongside 5 other watershed coordinators who are also receiving the same award for their multitude of contributions and steadfast dedication to improving water quality across the state. So Johnny, I will let you take over the screen, and you can share your PowerPoint and you can take it away. And just a reminder for everybody, keep putting your questions in the side there, and I will keep an eye on that. We'll take them later. It's all you, John.
Thanks, Allison. I'll see if I can get this pulled up here. That's joining in. Can everybody see that?
Yep, you're good to go.
Watershed approach. Awesome. Well, thank you, Allison. And I'm going to start off my presentation by just talking a little bit about the watershed approach and really get into what are we doing locally in our watersheds. What are some things we're doing well, and what are we going to continue doing into the future? But really, to start off, really at the beginning, the thing I like to start off a lot of my presentations with is really this understanding of what is a watershed. This idea that no matter what body of water you're talking about, a stream, a river, a lake, or a wetland, the water quality, the water impacts, the flooding, all that is dictated by what's happening in the landscape that drains to it. So if you want to improve water quality, if you want to reduce flooding, whatever your goal is, you're really going to have to think about what is happening in the watershed. And usually you're going to have to change something, change how you're managing that water. And that's something we've really been working on for years now locally. And I think we're really starting to make some progress in several different areas. And really the idea that land use is directly connected to the health of the water, to what's happening. Iowa's native prairies manage water a lot different than our agricultural areas. as agricultural manages water a lot different than our urban, our residential, and our commercial areas. And as I go through some of these things, I'd like you to think about those different landscapes and how Iowa, being one of the most changed, most land-altered states in the U.S., how that has really compounded some of our issues, and how are we going to address these landscape changes as we try and improve our water. And really the results has, I throw this up, and I've looked at this for years, it's always astounded me. We have a lot of issues in Iowa. And while all of these lines on this map are EPA impaired waters, it really shows kind of the daunting task, but it really shows how important the task is, specifically about water quality. There's a lot of work to be done, but even just looking here in Polk County, we have a lot of our own work to do here locally. But when I talk locally, I can tell you water doesn't oftentimes mean something different to the Des Moines Metro. When I work with city councils, or when I talk with residents and I talk about our watershed issues, these are a lot of the things that are being brought up. It's not always water quality. In fact, it's a lot of times it's, hey, my yard's underwater, or there's erosion, my street goes underwater, never gets a 2-inch rain. Or it's issues like this that are really hard to deal with. These people, this one sticks out to me. You can see there just in the middle, those people tried to strap their tree to a T-post to save it. And they were really worried about their tree, but I was out there and I was like, there's some bigger issues going on. And they told me how when they bought their houses, this was a little brook. It was a foot wide and a foot deep. And over the not many years later, that stream became 10 foot wide, 30, 40 foot, or 30, 40 foot wide and 10 foot deep. And really what had changed was their watershed had changed. And in this small example, their watershed had some urban development upstream, compounded with our more and more rain that we seem to be getting yearly. They had some stream degradation, and we're left with a really big concern. And I can tell a lot of people that I've met with over the years, water can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. And for some people, it's a really big concern. And while others, they don't think really about their water or where it goes. And we have to find ways to connect with all those people to think about these things and make changes. So as Allison asked me to put together a little presentation, I do quite a few presentations. I really try to think about what are a few key actions that may be of interest to your group that I could share with you today. So with this presentation, I'm going to go through really 5 key steps, key actions that are going on in Polk County, the Des Moines Metro, to try and improve our water. And so to jump right into it, one of the things we've been working hard on is the development of watershed management authorities. If you haven't heard of these, they've been around since 2010. And really, in its simplest form, there's no authority to them. They're merely a means of getting people together to cooperate and talk about watersheds. I have Polk County outlined in red there. And if we think about 4 Mile Creek, WMA, which was the first one started here locally, the watershed management brings together representatives from all the communities, from Slater, at the very top in Story County, to Ankeny, to the city of Des Moines, and Pleasant Hill and Altoona there at the very bottom. They brought those stakeholders together. They try and bring in the urban folks, the ag folks. And what these watersheds have really done is really just built trust amongst stakeholders. I can tell you, even especially working, all of our watersheds have ag and urban areas. There's a lot of lines of distrust between different stakeholders, different issues between stakeholders. And the biggest strength of these watershed groups that have formed has really been, how do we get everyone to sit together and best understand what each other's issues are and what are our commonalities and how are we going to fix these problems? And really one of the first tasks that these WMAs, each of them I've undertook, is really putting together a watershed plan. And now Patrick just spent a lot of time talking about the city's stormwater master plan. These efforts are very similar. They look at, this slide was actually taken out of a Walnut Creek plan page. And it really brings together, bringing the people together, understanding the issues, doing the effort to make the science, use science to better understand the watershed. People like myself walking every mile of stream, driving every road in the watershed, cataloging information, and then taking all of that information from the people, the science, the landscape, and putting together a set of recommendations. And if done well, a watershed plan can really provide a roadmap to improvement. And I love opening up a good plan that really puts tools in the hands of the people that can go out and do this work. On the contrary, like Patrick alluded to, if you don't have a good plan, a lot of those things that people think, well, a plan is just more time spent on engineering and it's just going to sit on a shelf. We got to really make sure that these plans are used and really dictate your efforts moving forward. And if well done, they can be a great asset. And at the end of the day, it's also, I always like to point out that our local WMAs, as we call them, watershed management authorities, they have no funding dedicated to them from the state or federal government. And when I was given my job as a watershed management authority coordinator a few years ago, they were like, John, here's your job. We want to build stuff. We want to improve water quality, reduce flooding. Good luck finding some funding to do so. And I was like, yeah, that's great. Let's go find some funding. And luckily, we had some good plans. And those good plans, you have to take them and you have to go out and you find good projects and you have to create a demand on the ground. You have to find people that want to do projects. And this is actually a little bit outdated slide, but since 2016, we've actually utilized over 28 different funding sources and raised now well over $10 million in funds just from that. Again, bringing the people together, finding those good projects that make a difference in the watershed, and aligning the needs with the demand, and the funding has followed, which is really a great model that really shows partnership can go a long way. Action number 2 that, again, Patrick alluded to is one we call the RAIN campaign. And it's an educational campaign that was actually funded through a DNR grant. That really, we wrote the grants and we said we really want to work with our local cities and find ways to empower homeowners to manage their runoff. And this picture really speaks to it. Like I said in my bio, I worked on the Easter Lake project for a few years and spent a lot of time down there working with residents to manage their water. And we wanted to take the lessons that were learned down in Easter Lake and really share them with cities across the metro. And we had a successful cost share program that really said we use project funds to work with homeowners that will cover part of the cost to install stormwater management, green infrastructure in your front yard. That will benefit the lake and it'll benefit you as a homeowner, possibly to fix your drainage issues or improve your lawn, give you better landscaping, really, again, get a win-win. We wanted to find a way, and as we saw over the last couple of years, a lot of cities, including Des Moines, started following with their own incentive programs. And in some cities, they were really taking off like wildfire. In other cities, there just wasn't a lot of interest from residents. So this campaign's been an effort to deliver this information to the cities who can use tools to outreach to their homeowners. And one practice that's really been the highlight of this first year of the campaign has been soil quality restoration. Again, personally, I wasn't a big believer in this for a few years. Started seeing, had a few incidents that impacted me as a coordinator. One of them was we had a classic residential lot in Ankeny. Every time it rained, they had 2 inches of water sitting, ponding in their backyard because in their drainage swale, they had someone installed a fence. It's built up a little bit, and that water simply could not infiltrate into the soil. They completed soil quality restoration like in this picture here. And what do you know? They had a lawn that looked like this, and they never had that ponding water in their backyard again. The difference was is that soil quality restoration improves your soil health and creates pore space for your stormwater to soak into your soils. And it's very cheap. It's very cost effective. The other big thing that happened was we did some pre and post soil core sampling on about 50 yards that we did these SQRs on down at Easter Lake. And what we saw was a 3 to 5% increase in organic matter from a one-time application of aeration and compost. And again, I know that 3 to 5% may not mean much to a lot of people, but in working with ag landowners, when we're talking about doing cover crops and no-till, oftentimes it can take up to 10 years to get you 1% of increase in organic matter. So it was really astounding to me to see that vast improvements to soil health that, again, you can sell to people that may not care too much about water quality, but a lot of people want a green lawn like in this picture. Another part of it is this, again, getting me a little bit out of my comfort zone, but we thought about how at events do we get people to come talk to us about stormwater. Personally, I'm a self-proclaimed stormwater nerd. I could talk about stormwater all day, but most people don't really want to come up. So we did a few outside the box things. We created some large art pieces to get the kids drawn in. We were able to use it at the Home and Garden Show. Patrick was there. And so far it's been great. It's really been, again, thinking outside the box. How do we deliver this information to people and get the information in front of them so they can make these decisions? The third project, kind of flipping the script, think about our ag partners. One of the things we've been doing for a few years is really trying to work with farmers and landowners to treat their tile outlets. So these are essentially underground pipes that drain water subsurface into those small creeks and streams in Polk County. And there's a couple practices. One of them that's really was actually created by Iowa State that intercepts that tile, puts in a water control structure and distribution lines, and essentially it forces that water, rather than dumping straight into the stream, it forces it into these distribution pipes, and it then pushes through the natural black Iowa soils, where the soil, the carbon-rich soil, actually sequesters the nitrates, and we see up to a 90% reduction in nitrates. So it's actually a very cheap practice, only $3,000 to $4,000 on average to install. You can utilize your existing stream buffers. But the fact is that for the last 3 or 4 years, we were only installing maybe 3 or 4 of these a year. And we really had a heart to heart and sat down and said, what do we need to do to, for instance, in the 4-mile plan, it says we need to install 100 of these. How are we going to install 100 of these and not take 30 years? So we went out, we met with some of those landowners that we've been working with, that we installed some of them with, and we really came to the realization that the whole process was just too complicated. If you think about a farmer, they're busy, they're trying to get their crops in. They may have some interest in conservation, but when it comes to multiple rounds of paperwork, finding a contractor, and really just a complex process, even when you're willing, we have funds to cover 100% of the cost, we're losing most of our landowners through that process. So this year, we actually outlined a process where we mapped all the sites where these should work. We reached out to every landowner individually. We offered to, actually as a county, we are managing the contractor. We're going to be doing group installs in an effort to lower the price, because another thing we were finding was they were having issues finding contractors for these small projects. And as we sit right now, we have over 120 sites surveyed in 4 Mile and Walnut Creeks. And our goal is now to install, we're hoping to install 100 of these in fall of 2020. To put that in perspective, there were 50 installed in the whole state in 2018. So we think we have a process here that could work really well. Obviously, we have a few steps left, but we're seeing really promising response from landowners and sites. And again, the great thing about these is they're completely underground. If installed effectively, the landowner does not lose any production land. It's utilizing those existing buffers sites, and really adding a layer of benefits to not only get the habitat on top and the management of surface water, but now we're going to treat that subsurface water. And there was a question about bioreactors. Now, just like green infrastructure, there's a whole toolbox of tools that can be done. The same is said for the agricultural lands. So the saturated buffers require lots of lateral space and generally need at least 500 feet to run those distribution lines. When you don't have that space, we're looking at bioreactors actually as a secondary practice to install. And the full name is a wood chip bioreactor, and essentially you intercept the tile with this pit of wood chips, and this is a picture of the pit being dug. It's filled with wood chips. The water flow is now through that carbon-rich wood material that is buried under a couple foot of soil. The carbon, again, sequesters the nitrates and removes the nitrates out of the water. We're actually excited. We had a partnership with Des Moines, with NRCS, found and designed several sites where Des Moines actually partnered with local landowners and installed them within the city limits, but on ag lands. It was really a great show of partnership. So now that we had a couple of these in Polk County, we're hoping to move that forward too. Now, I did say that this is a secondary practice. A couple of the reasons we're prioritizing saturated buffers is these generally are $10,000 to $15,000 versus the $3,000 to $4,000 per tile outlet to treat. And the second part is they haven't been around too long, but there is a point in which the carbon, there's not enough carbon in the wood chips, it decays and breaks down. So the time frame I've been told is around 15 years. You'll have to dig it up and replace the wood chips. Now, again, that's something to think about long term. The saturated buffers essentially could be viewed as a permanent practice on the ground. Number 4 is looking at the actual urban stormwater policy. Now, when I say policy, I'm talking about thinking about new. Currently, when we think about the Des Moines Metro, we think about our small streams. This is a lot of what we see. We see a lot of erosion happening. A lot of our streams have been classified as severe erosion, in some cases very severe. And a lot of that, we know that when we worked with a close partnership with MPO, Capital Crossroads, and the metro cities over the last 2 years to look at how are we managing our stormwater with new developments and how could we improve it. And through that 2-year process, I think we had more meetings than any of us ever thought we would have discussing how to manage the stormwater. But there were a lot of key points were agreed upon, and in its simplest form, these new set of recommendations follow something called the unified sizing criteria, which is essentially if you get 1 inch of rain or 7 inches of rain, the unified sizing criteria says you need to control the release of that water to have it mimic the pre-development, pre-settlement runoff rates. So if you were to get a 1-year storm event or a water quality event, the 1.25 inch rain, you want that water to infiltrate into the ground or leave at a rate that would mimic a prairie area. The same would be spoken if you had a 10-year event or a 100-year storm event, a very large event. You want that water to leave the sites. Say it's a 100-acre development, you want that 100 acres to act as if it were mimicking prairie. So really trying to release the whole suite of storm events. We see a lot of variances between communities, but we do have several communities in the metro that really focus just on the extreme flood protection, and a lot of those smaller 1 to 2, even 10-year events oftentimes flow right through their structures and cause a lot of that downstream erosion. So this process has been completed. The recommendations have been provided back to all the cities, and we're hoping to start seeing adoptions this summer with the goal of implementation beginning January 1st of 2021. And at the end of the day, I love to show pictures like this. Prairie Trail in Ankeny is a great example where these tactics, these design mechanisms were used. What's sitting behind Jennifer Welch there, our local urban conservationist, is a stormwater management feature surrounded by natives, really incorporated into the development. And while we have these new design standards, we're really looking at how do we bring stormwater management into making it an asset rather than just something that has to be dealt with or thrown in the corner of the development. How do we flip that script and talk about it earlier in the process and really think about how do parks and stormwater management and green space all interact to improve our communities and really address some of those erosive and flooding issues we're having. Fifth and final one is water monitoring. And we really wanted to, there were a couple things that were happening, and as some of these efforts were going underway, and there's a lot going on across Polk County, there were a lot of folks saying, what's being done to monitor the water? And one of the first things, Rich Leopold, director of Polk County Conservation Board, when Iowa Water kind of closed as a program, and him being one of the people that really started that program years ago when he was with DNR, said, hey, we have a lot of staff that all could be trained to monitor our water bodies. If nothing else, could create really a red flag system, or at its best could create some long-term data trends that could be used. So a couple years ago, he said, we want every staff member for Polk County Conservation Board to go out bi-weekly. And they had about 50 sites that they incorporated in that first year. And several of us with the WMAs, we shared this opportunity, and a lot of cities stepped up and said, hey, we have staff too. And before you know it, we had those sites grew to, as they sit today, 87 sites across Polk County are managed bi-weekly by staff across Polk County. So that was an exciting development. Secondly, we really wanted to look at more within our watershed management authorities. Two of the ones that I work a lot with are 4 Mile Creek. We had a couple questions with how are things happening locally. One of them being, how are different landscapes impacting our watersheds? Whether it's from the upstream agriculture areas, the more suburban, newer development portions, or even the older residential areas that are oftentimes impact our lower portions of our watersheds. So about a year ago, we partnered with Drake University to incorporate a whole suite of water monitoring systems. We installed 3 different stations, both 3 in Walnut Creek and 3 in 4 Mile Creek. And they really sought, there you can see the kind of the suite of what's being monitored, either by real-time sampling or by bi-weekly grab samples. We really wanted to seek out answering how are our different landscapes impacting our watersheds here in central Iowa. We wanted to look at what different types of watershed characteristics or practices that are installed are making the best impacts on our watersheds, and what is the overall stream health in comparison to other streams across the U.S. and even around the world. And Drake University, they really presented to our WMAs a 3-year study where they could seek out to answer those questions. And in a partnership with Des Moines Waterworks and about a dozen different communities, we're able to fully fund that 3-year study. And that's going to go through summer, early fall of 2022. So that's a lot of information, but I'm welcome to take any questions for you.
Sure. So it looks like we have one from Sheila, and she's just asking, has there been any research into the impact of poor quality clay-based backfill soil that developers have used over the last decade?
Yes, let me try and stop sharing. There we go. So there's been a lot of research nationally about soil health, and the fact that we know, and we know that in central Iowa, there's a lot of soil disturbance is happening during the new development process. And while a lot of cities have really been able to successfully stop the off-site removal of topsoil, so it's not being taken off and sold in communities, what's happening a lot of is during the process of that soil being moved and stockpiled and being eventually mixed with subsoils, and then a lot of compaction during the home construction process, those things are all leaving rather poor soils on a lot of our newer development areas. And while there was the statewide topsoil rule that was passed a couple years ago that didn't last very long, I would say in our recommendations for new development stormwater standards, it doesn't say specifically that you are required to have so many inches of topsoil, but in the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual that's referenced quite a bit in the recommendations, having good topsoil is a very cost-effective way to manage your small storm events. And if you choose not to use topsoil, that's completely up to your community and or your development, but you're going to have to do more work in a different practice to manage that water versus if you chose to use topsoil, your retention basins would be smaller, as one example.
Sure. So there's another, how did the new zoning plan help or hinder our stormwater mitigation and watershed management efforts in the metro or in Des Moines? And that can be for either of you, really.
So I would say to that even before we started this Capital Crossroads efforts, one of the things that started, actually, one of the people was Jonathan Gano, wrote a letter asking Capital Crossroads to look at stormwater management. We then, not coincidentally, but every one of our watershed management plans in the Des Moines Metro actually spoke specifically to new construction standards that they needed to be updated. So with recommendation letters from several communities and recommendations from every watershed management authority that stated that their plan said we should look at this, kind of all compounded that this effort fit right into the recommendations that each of our local watersheds said was needed.
I missed the question. So has there been any coordination with surrounding counties? This person specifically is wondering about Story and Boone County.
As far as the stormwater ordinance work or our watershed efforts in general?
It sounds like watershed in general.
Yeah, so some of our closest efforts, a lot of our watersheds cross county boundaries. Great example is Walnut Creek. Sits about half in Dallas County, half in Polk County. We know that for some of the downstream communities like Clive and Windsor Heights, they need to see work happening in rural Dallas County. So that's been an ongoing conversation where we're actually working with landowners in those areas to try and connect those goals. Boone County actually has been very involved in some of our watershed projects, including the Big Creek Lake project for years. And there's one of our youngest WMAs is the Beaver Creek. That's actually just finishing up their planning process. Boone County has been involved in that. And even a couple of the watersheds that I'm not too involved with, the North Raccoon actually has a watershed management authority, a much different scale, a much larger river. Boone County has been very involved in that. And with Story County has actually been a leader in Central Iowa in a lot of this watershed planning. They're doing a lot of their own local watershed plans. And while a lot of our priority watersheds just barely touch into Story County, we've oftentimes discussed what they've been doing successfully up there and seen if we can try some of those things in Polk County.
Steal the good ideas.
Yes.
Not reinventing the wheel.
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to, since this group is Des Moines specific, I just want to give one plug for the RAIN campaign. RAINcampaign.org is a website now with all the information. It'll link you to the cost share sheet that will take you to the city of Des Moines information. And I believe, and Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have the sheet in front of me, that you are the main contact for that program, correct?
Sure.
Okay, well, I'll just give out Patrick's email in case anybody ever wants to talk to him anyways.
I give his personal cell to everyone I meet, so.
Yeah. I'll put it in the chat real quick. So, all right, well, for the sake of time, we appreciate both of you coming and talking to us. There's a lot of good stuff. We're happy to have you both as leaders in this area, and we look forward to keeping track of what's going on and hearing more from you guys in the future. And with that, I will hand over to Dan.
Thanks again, John and Patrick, for being here and talking with us about stormwater in the Des Moines metro area. We're actually going to move into our task force meeting from the presentation portion, and you're more than welcome to stick around for that if you'd like. Otherwise, we're just going to go over some of our task force usual touch items.
So just process. I have now unmuted people. So if you're not talking, mute yourself, but you're able to, people are able to jump in now during the meeting portion.
So we were going to move into talking about our new sustainability manager, I believe, and Alex, if you're here, if you want to talk a little bit about how that process is going.
Yeah, hi. So we have officially hired a new sustainability program manager, Jeremy Karen, who's on, who most of you already know because he's been on the task force for some time. So I'll pass it over to Jeremy and let him give a little introduction about himself. He started Monday and has a really wide breadth of experience. So we're very excited to have him on board.
Hi, everyone. I'm having a little technical difficulties with internet speed over here right now on the east side. So I'm using the phone audio and probably won't be able to use the camera and would get kicked out of the meeting otherwise. But excited to be on board as the new sustainability program manager for the city of Des Moines. I started this position Monday, and so there's a lot to absorb, as you can imagine. You know, I wanted to mention, everyone gave kind of an introduction of where they're from and their background. I'm not a native Iowan, but I'm excited to be a proud East Sider now, and relocated to the Midwest from Boston in April of 2018 after completing my master's in sustainable design at Boston Architectural College. I'm actually a native of Maine, and lived in Boston for the last 9 years or so before moving out here. And so growing up in rural Maine really instilled a passion for the outdoors and protecting the natural resources we all depend on. And then living in a large city like Boston has really given me the perspective of the sustainability challenges that large cities face. Just a background on my professional experience. I worked on energy and sustainability in resilience planning and programming with the state of Maine and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for a number of years. And more recently, I've been with the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities, where I manage the B3 building benchmarking program for utilities and public building owners within their territory. I also developed an energy efficiency rebate program for small and underserved communities and advocated for the transition to utility scale renewable energy where feasible. And then more recently, I've worked with a team of professionals across the U.S. To develop an electric vehicle planning toolkit. And that's going to be available later this year. And that's something that I hope to take advantage of in our work moving forward here in the city. And I know that we have a lot of work ahead of us over the next several years, and a lot of new challenges we're all facing as a result of COVID-19. And I think the city's pledge to bring this position on, despite those challenges, really underscores their commitment to ensuring that the city becomes a model for sustainability in the Midwest and hopefully nationally as well. So we're lucky that we also have a talented group of folks like all of you with your own passions and your own interests. And we really hope to leverage that over the next several years as we build out this sustainability program for the city. As I mentioned, we're still figuring things out, and I'm still figuring things out. This is only my third day on the job. But I wanted to provide some insights as to the priorities of the position over the next 6 months. So a big chunk of my time is going to be committed to the benchmarking ordinance and implementing that. We have a lot of challenges that we've faced with COVID-19 that have, impacted the schedule of that implementation, and but we're still planning to move full force ahead with that. And I should be able to provide some updates on that effort at the next meeting. Another priority will be the climate action plan. I've already started coordinating with UNI and ICLEI on that, and should also have some updates on that at the next meeting. Another priority, obviously, is my role as a liaison with the task force, and Alex will be transferring that over to me over the next several meetings here. And I'm planning to attend all the meetings moving forward and providing updates on the programs and projects we'll be working on at the city. I'm definitely looking forward to working collaboratively with the task force, to meet the goals that we've set as a task force, and then that the city has as well. I also wanted to mention that we will probably focus on city buildings some as well. With my background in energy efficiency and resilience master planning, those are some personal passions of mine, asset management and improving assets, making them less vulnerable to climate impacts. So that's something that we'll probably be taking a look at here over the next year or so. So I wanted to mention that considering my new role, I will need to find someone probably to replace me as the chair on the External Communications and Outreach Committee. So if there's anybody that's interested in that, please let us all know, and we can take the first steps to getting them on board with that committee. So with that, I would say, should you have any questions or want to discuss anything sustainability related, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'll drop my email and phone number in the chat down here at the bottom. With that, I'll open it up. If you have any questions or want to just comment on anything, feel free.
Jeremy, I want to say congratulations. We're really excited. I think you're going to be amazing in this role, and we're really excited that you're actually in place and we can move forward with this now. And thank you, Alex, for all the help you've been giving us too.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for letting me part of your task force for the past few months, and it's been really great getting to know you all, and you guys have been doing really great work, and I'm really excited to see how this is all elevated now that we have somebody in a full-time role dedicated to a lot of this work. So I think a lot of great things will happen.
Jeremy, this is Kent. Congratulations.
Kent.
That's great.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I know when we first met, we share a connection to New England, and I really appreciate your connection to Maine. I just wanted to ask if you have any idea of how many commercial properties have reported their scores on time this year. May 1st was supposed to be the deadline, and how's the city handling that under the current situation? And were you able to use, were they able to develop any kind of a data program to handle the data, either Energy Star Portfolio Manager or the B3 scores?
Yep. Yeah. Like I mentioned, I'll hopefully have more information to provide an update at the next meeting. The city has taken some steps to address the impact of COVID-19, and I don't believe that the deadline was extended for submitting data, but there is some effort to reduce or eliminate fees related to that for this particular year as a result of COVID-19. We're still planning to continue with having data submitted throughout the year, where I don't know the exact number of buildings that have submitted to date, but we have, I know, a total of 612 buildings that need to comply from what I've seen recently. And we'll be working towards that over the next year to make sure that we get all of those folks on board, get their data submitted, and work with them to transition their data into both B3 and Energy Star moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say, echo, congratulations, Jeremy. Really looking forward after being a task force now for 4.5 years, and our main goal being a climate action plan, that we can now move forward in more concrete ways to actually create and adopt one for Des Moines. So very excited that you're on board with the city, and also a thank you, Alex, for being the go-between for the city for the last few months. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, congratulations, Jeremy. Sheila and I, when we met with Jeremy for the communications task force, found out at that meeting, and it was difficult to keep a secret, but we did it, and here we are. But yeah, we're really excited to have you on board with the city, and super excited to start working with you. And with that transition into some of our subcommittee work, I believe that you still have